Okay, this is going to be a video response to Conundrum. And I want to dedicate an entire video to this because there's just so much that can be said about this. So Conundrum made a logical response to the argument I made about the universe being infinitely free, and that infinite freedom can produce everything that could ever possibly happen, including everything possible and impossible. So he says, if everything can exist, then where are my unicorns? Where is my planet shaped like a cube? Where is my 10-headed king cobra with a pair of wings? Where are my pink elephants? Where are my dancing trees? Where is my flying spaghetti monster? Etc. If the universe is absolutely infinite and infinitely everything can exist, then everything that you can ever think of, everything you can ever fantasize, everything you can ever imagine and make up with your creative mind must exist in reality, according to this logic. Alright, now, first of all, this subject is extremely counterintuitive. You will very easily fall into the trap of self-contradiction. And I admit that I have contradicted myself while trying to explain the concept of infinite freedom. But that's precisely the problem. Whenever you try to talk about this subject, which I consider to be the absolute truth of existence, then you inevitably will fall into the trap of self-contradiction. And you will logically collide against yourself. You will block yourself in a logical way because the absolute truth is unspeakable, it's unexplainable, and it's out of reach from logical understanding. So whenever you come close to the absolute truth with the use of logic, logic itself will stand in opposition with itself and will collide with itself, trying to destroy itself, essentially. It's a duality standing in opposition, trying to collapse into non-duality. So when I use the concept infinite freedom or absolute freedom, that's a counterintuitive concept in its purest form. That's pure self-contradiction, because infinite freedom means that freedom itself is also free from itself. Okay? But if freedom is free from freedom, then it's not free. But infinite freedom is also free from being unfree or not free, if that even is a word. So infinite freedom is free from being free and being unfree. Freedom is free from the concept of freedom. Freedom is free from the logic behind freedom. Freedom is free from the logical understanding of the concept of freedom. Get it? Are you starting to get it how counterintuitive it is? So trying to think about freedom and trying to define it is an absolute failure. Also keep in mind that nothingness is synonymous with infinite freedom, because within nothingness there is absolutely nothing. So it's free from everything. Now what about the concept of absolute infinity? Well, this is yet another counterintuitive concept in its purest form. The logical understanding of the concept of infinity is limited in comparison with actual infinity. Actual infinity is unlimited, and it's impossible to grasp the totality of actual infinity, because there is no totality, because it's unlimited. And the problem is that whenever we give a definition to something, We want to give it a total definition, a complete and perfect definition. So how can you give a total definition to infinity when infinity doesn't contain a totality? Giving a total definition to something that is not total is another contradiction. So also in this situation, logic is too limited and it will logically block itself. Also, infinity is free from totality. It's not total, so it doesn't have a form or shape. Also, infinity cannot refer to itself, because in order to refer to yourself, you must be limited with a certain form and shape. So infinity is also free from itself, because it doesn't know itself, because it can't refer to itself as an existing thing or concept. In other words, there is no such thing as infinity itself. That's what infinity means. Infinity is only infinite when there is no such thing as infinity itself. So our logical understanding about infinity does not explain infinity. You see, infinity literally is the absence of understanding. If you think that you can understand infinity, then you are limiting it. To understand something is to limit it. If you allow something to be free from your understanding, it will become unlimited. So if you truly want to understand infinity, then you should realize that the act of trying to understand it is precisely the thing that prevents you from understanding it. Because to understand is to limit. So once again, logic stands in opposition with itself, being in conflict with itself, trying to destroy itself. So infinity is free from understanding. Nothingness is free from understanding. Infinite freedom is free from understanding. Infinity is free from itself. Nothingness is free from itself. Freedom itself is free from itself. As you can see, all these concepts, they all share the same counterintuitive features. Okay, but what about the world that we do know and can logically understand? Does that world originate from infinite freedom? Does infinite freedom / nothingness create our universe, and does it create infinitely everything? Again, trying to understand the perspective of infinite freedom is impossible. The fact is that our understanding is limited and is by definition a process that can only understand limited things. If the universe was created by a limited mechanism, let's say, that is understandable and which is not infinitely free, then pretty soon we run into the infinite regress problem. You know, if the universe is caused by a particular mechanism, then what caused that mechanism? And what caused the mechanism that caused that mechanism? And what caused the mechanism that caused the mechanism that caused that mechanism? Etc. If we say that everything is limited and understandable, then automatically we will get stuck with an infinite amount of causations. And so we're dealing with the concept of infinity again. But can we understand infinity? No, we can't. So it doesn't matter. If you think that you can understand the true origin of existence without running into the infinite regress problem or any counterintuitive concepts, then please let me know in the comment section. But for me, that's impossible. If the universe was caused by an understandable and limited mechanism, then that mechanism logically was caused by an infinite amount of previous causes, which leads us to the impossible understanding of infinity, because in order to understand infinity you must limit it in some way, but infinity is unlimited. So logic blocks itself in a logical way, it contradicts itself, which leads us to the only possible outcome of the total collapse of logical understanding. So what is existence ultimately? It's the total collapse of logical understanding. And to answer the initial question, do unicorns exist? Does everything possible and impossible exist? Well, ultimately, the understanding of the concept of existing and non-existing, or possible and impossible, collapses. Understanding becomes meaningless. Maybe it's better to ask, is the universe made out of limited and understandable things? Well, yes, but only if we are not seeking for absolute answers. Does my voice exist? Well, yes, but only if we define it as a limited thing. So is my voice essentially limited and understandable? Well, again, we will run into the problem of infinite regress. We can keep on questioning forever. What is my voice? Well, it's sound. What is sound? Well, that's air in motion. What is air and what is motion? Well, it's the movement of air molecules. What is movement and what are air molecules, etc. We can question everything to infinity. So we will never have an absolute answer and understanding. If you want to have an absolute answer, you will need to understand infinity. But infinity is precisely the absence of understanding. So what is my voice? It's moving air, and it's moving air molecules, and molecules are made out of atoms, and atoms are made out of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and protons are made out of quarks, and quarks are made out of yada yada yada. Can we keep splitting matter apart into smaller and smaller bits forever? Or is there an end to it? Is it limited? If it is limited, for example, let's say that you can't split apart quarks any further. Quarks are the smallest particles in existence, and everything is essentially made out of quarks. Okay, but we will still be able to question the existence of quarks. What are quarks? Why do they exist? But if the quarks is the absolute answer to everything, why are we still able to question them? I mean, if there is such a thing as an absolute answer, then this answer will, for once and for all, destroy your ability to question your existence any further, because absolute answers cannot be questioned. Or can it be? If you are able to question an answer, that still somehow means that you're able to break it down into smaller bits and search for deeper answers. Like, when does an answer make absolute logical sense to you? When will you stop questioning reality? What kind of answer will make you stop questioning reality? That's a good question. And I think it's infinite. I think it's impossible to come to an absolute answer that can logically satisfy you and that can make you stop questioning reality. So if we are able to question reality and break it down into smaller and smaller bits forever, then what is everything essentially? Well, if it goes on forever into infinity, then the logical understanding of everything essentially totally collapses, because infinity is once again the absence of understanding. If reality is made out of infinitely smaller and smaller bits, then it is unlimited. So how can you fit something which is unlimited into a limited understandable theory? The word unlimited is a limited word. True unlimitedness cannot be grasped by logical understanding. So if everything is made out of infinitely smaller bits, then it's impossible for you to grasp what everything essentially is with your logical understanding. Okay, so another example. What is a bottle of beer, essentially? It's impossible to grasp the infinite totality of the bottle of beer with your limited logical understanding. So if you want to know what a bottle of beer essentially is, you have to drop your logical understanding and perceive it without the need to understand it. Does the bottle of beer even exist? Well, it's just too much to grasp this with your limited logical understanding. You can infinitely question what the concept of existing absolutely means. You can infinitely question what the absolute color of the bottle is. You can infinitely question what the absolute shape of the bottle is. You can infinitely question what the absolute taste of the beer is. You can infinitely question what the absolute sound is when you blow inside the bottle, etc. It's just impossible to come to an absolute answer. All we have is relative answers. If we want absolute answers, we will have to dig infinitely deep. For example, what is the absolute color of a bottle of beer? Let's say it's a brown color. It's a brown bottle of beer. But what kind of brown is it? How many shades of brown can we perceive? I'm pretty sure there are way more shades of brown than we are able to perceive. But the question is, does there exist a limited amount of shades of brown? Or can we keep dividing it into more subtle shades of brown forever? So, is the color brown an absolute answer when we question what color it is? Now we can say that it's definitely brownish and definitely not greenish. The sky is definitely bluish and definitely not pinkish. The earth is definitely spherish and definitely not flatish. Now, are those absolute statements? Okay, so now we're dealing with the fact that we put our perceptions of reality into different categories. We say one thing is spherish and another thing is flatish. But that's always relative, because can something be an absolute sphere? Or can something be absolutely flat? You know, we have our geometrical model of an absolute sphere, but the shape of our planet is not 100% identical to our perfect geometrical sphere. Another example, do perfect squares exist in reality? We have our perfect geometrical model of a square where every corner equals 90.00000000, etc. degrees. But can we find such a perfect square in reality? I don't think so. So, a perfect square does not exist in reality, but we use it as a reference. Whenever we find an object that looks like a square, we will say that it resembles our geometrical model of a square, which does not exist in reality. And the difference is that we can perfectly understand our geometrical model of a square because it's so damn perfect. There are no deviations. A perfect square is made out of 4 perfectly flat lines which are put into perfect corners of each 90.00000000 degrees. But in reality, every square-like object always has some deviations, because reality is always more complicated than our abstract geometrical models of it. So it's interesting to know that we can only understand our perfect abstract models of reality, which do not actually exist in reality. Reality relatively resembles our absolute abstract models of reality. And our models will probably never absolutely fit into reality itself. This is another problem. We want to describe reality with our abstract models which do not exist. We want to describe the square-like shape of a window with our perfect model of a square. But the only thing that can perfectly describe the shape of the window is the window itself. Every object perfectly describes itself, and we can't use anything else to perfectly describe the object with. That's our biggest problem. We want to describe an object with something else. We want to make associations. We say, that window looks like a square. Or that window looks like a tile, which is also square-like. Or that window looks like the frame of a painting, which is also square-like. In other words, we will always make associations, and we want to describe something with something else. But the only thing that can describe something perfectly is the thing itself. But the problem is that if we want to describe something, we must use something else. That's the mechanism of describing something. To describe something is to use associations, is to use other stuff that resembles that something. But it will never be a perfect description, because the only thing that perfectly describes something is the thing itself. So in order for something to be perfect, we can't use anything else to describe it with. So a thing itself, if we want it to be perfectly explained, is utterly unexplainable and indescribable. A thing is only perfect when you don't associate it with anything else. You have to leave it alone as it is in order for it to be a perfectly and objectively true phenomena. So you can never have perfect knowledge and absolute answers about anything. It's only perfect and absolute when you stop trying to describe it with anything other than itself. So to come back to the initial question, do unicorns exist? Well, what is a unicorn by itself when we stop trying to associate it with anything else in order to define and describe what a unicorn is? Well, it's the total collapse of understanding. Does everything possible and impossible exist? Well, what is everything essentially? Everything is what it is when we stop making associations to define and describe what everything is. See? Is there a difference between reality and fantasy? Well, can you give me an absolute explanation to what reality and what fantasy is? How do you describe fantasy and how do you describe reality? Those terms can only be perfectly explained by themselves and not by anything else that tries to refer to it. Yet that is what is happening when we try to describe and explain something. Once again, for something to be perfectly true, You must leave it for what it is without the intervention of associative thinking. Alright, I'm going to end this video right here. It's quite a bunch. I don't know whether or not this has logically satisfied you. Probably not entirely, but so we will just continue this discussion, which I find very interesting. And I hope you find it too. Alright, cheers!